Welcome back to Cyber Defense Webinars. I'm your host, Gary Malevsky, and the publisher of Cyber Defense Magazine. Also, stay through to the end because you're going to get access to some amazing free tools from Defendify. So let's talk about today's webinar. It's entitled, The Smart Approach to Building Comprehensive Cybersecurity Without Security Staff. As you know, we've got evolving cyber threats that aren't just targeting the big guys, the large enterprises. SMBs have become a major target. It can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars in damages if you're not prepared for the attack. So how are you going to build your comprehensive cybersecurity plan, policy, procedure, education and training, scanning, remediation, and all these other things you're going to need to do across your entire organization? Well, joining us today is a 20-year cybersecurity veteran and co-founder of Defendify, Rob Simopoulos, who will explain how you can have a 7/24 cybersecurity program streamlined across people, process, and technology without needing complex tools, specialized professional staff, or spending a lot of money. So let me tell you about Rob. Rob Simopoulos, the co-founder of Defendify, has more than 20 years of cybersecurity experience. He's a frequent speaker, a thought leader across security groups and publications. As co-founder of Defendify, Rob helped introduce the award-winning cybersecurity platform focused on you for small and medium-sized businesses that is trusted by thousands of users across the globe. Rob, thank you so much for coming today. Welcome.
Gary, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. I'm excited about sharing the information I have here, and we'll jump right into it. How does that sound? Hey, just to clarify, yeah, 20 years in security industry. I've been in a bunch of different areas of the security genre, not just cybersecurity. I've actually run and operated physical security system organizations as well. So I think that as I go through the presentation, I'll be sharing some of that as well, because I've seen it evolve on the physical security side and the cybersecurity side on both fronts. Now, what we're going to talk about today is what Gary touched on. It's a challenging atmosphere right now from a cybersecurity perspective for small and mid-sized organizations who do not have security professionals on staff. And let's just jump right in here and start with the first point. You know, if you're sitting there today and you're trying to figure out how do I get cybersecurity into my business, you might be the VP of IT, you could be the IT manager, perhaps you're the COO or the CTO. There's a lot of challenges that you're really looking at. The first one is that, yes, it's true. Attacks are targeting all businesses, not just enterprise organizations, but small businesses as well. Regulation is coming really quickly. So from a compliance perspective, we're seeing that starting to grow on all different aspects, but we're also seeing third-party vendor assessments begin to grow. So when you're doing business with larger entities, they're sending questionnaires and asking you about what your cybersecurity looks like, and they're demanding to understand that you are protecting their data appropriately. These are challenging things. You know, on top of all that, you're trying to just run the organization from an IT perspective, you know, hardware, cybersecurity, help desk, all those different things. What we hear from a lot of these organizations is they really just don't know where to start. You know, they can go follow those frameworks, but if you do open up many of them like NIST and so on, they're pretty complicated for the average IT person. If you go out and you start looking through all of these different logos that you see on your screen and try to figure out how do I piecemeal and put together these single point solutions and manage them with a small IT team, that can be really tough. And quite often organizations will start to realize that they're all priced really for enterprise, and a lot of times they're just out of budget. You know, we can't ignore the fact that we continue to read about a shortage of security professionals. So even though organizations may decide, why don't I just hire a bunch of IT security pros, bring them into the organization, perhaps hire a CISO. The problem is that if you can find them, they're gonna, you know, demand some pretty significant pay for that. And the challenge is if you can even get them. There is a huge shortage, which we're gonna talk about. And I also just shared with you about the challenge with building a stack. Now, I mentioned that, you know, I come from a background as well of physical security, and it's really interesting when you think about the way that small and mid-sized organizations have started to protect their physical buildings and so on. And remember that cybersecurity does require strong physical security protection and controls in place, because if someone did get access to, you know, devices and networks and so on, that could be devastating as well. But, you know, just to look and say, where has small and mid-sized organizations spent their money? A lot of them have spent a lot of money on physical security, access control, alarm systems, cameras. They've stored their assets in secure places, like in locked rooms and stock rooms. They've trained their employees on how to be great employees, and they have safety training and so on. But the average loss today in a burglary is pretty low. But the average loss from a cyber breach, starts around $200,000, and that's for small to mid-sized business. And we've seen statistics that are, in a different range. And Gary mentioned up to millions, and that definitely can be the case. But the fact is that an organization today needs really comprehensive cybersecurity in order to have proper protection. If you do follow one of those frameworks, you'll see that the controls are not just about protecting the endpoint with some digital technology. There are a bunch of other things that are required, such as the things that you're seeing on here. You've got to be training your team. You've got to have policies and plans. You do need endpoint protection on those devices as well. But when we look under the hood, and we've seen thousands of organizations and what they have in place, many of these companies are protected this way. It's some antivirus and it's a firewall. And that's the extent of the protection that they have. Nowhere near enough. So the tides are turning. It's making sense now for organizations, for sure, to start to invest in comprehensive layers of cybersecurity. And as we go through the presentation, we're going to learn that there are some challenges. So I did mention that it's not just enterprise organizations who are facing attacks and so on. These statistics are showing that 50% of attacks are focusing on small businesses, and 68% of small businesses have experienced a cyber attack in the last 12 months. Pre-COVID, when I was up on stage talking to people and discussing cybersecurity with small and mid-sized organizations, I would ask them to put their hand up and say, how many of you have witnessed a cyber attack, got a bunch of phishing attacks that look like maybe they're coming from business owners and so on, and people would put their hands up. It's probably around 70%. Now, it's important also to understand that the SBA, the Small Business Authority, has said that 500 employees and less is a small business. And for a lot of people, they may not consider themselves a small business when they're 500 employees and less. But the fact is that that's the way it's defined here in the United States. And we saw with all the PPP loans going out saying 500 employees and less is a small business. So you've got to consider that as well. Now, one of the areas that we're going to discuss is the fact that it is hard to find IT security professionals today. The statistics that we're seeing, including Gary's group here from Cyber Defense Magazine, is that there is a shortage of IT security professionals. So we know that CISOs today are saying, we're struggling hiring the right people to come onto the team. We need to get people on board. It's a huge challenge. We also know that we're continuing to read statistics about a shortage of cybersecurity jobs being filled. So there's a huge amount of demand for these people, and organizations are struggling hiring them. So when those types of things happen, the cost to hire IT security professionals starts to skyrocket. If you can even get them on board, can you afford to keep them in the organization, and can you even get them to come on board inside of the group? So that makes it difficult for a small to mid-sized organization who's competing against very large enterprise organizations to recruit talent. It's like you just can't afford it, which is a really tough spot. Now, it's interesting because I do hear from people who say, hey, I'm in the industry and I'm trying to get hired and I can't get hired. We actually have a podcast that's coming up with a cybersecurity researcher who shared with us that there are skill sets beyond just technical skill sets that are required in order to be hired today. CISOs are looking for some of the more non-technical skill sets in these people because they have to talk to customers and they have to be able to do presentations and so on. So maybe a consideration also that if you are an IT security professional and you're trying to get hired and you're struggling there, that perhaps going and learning a little bit more on those types of skill sets might be beneficial. And you can go to our website and listen to that podcast once we release it, which should be in the next week or so. The overwhelming thing that we continue to hear from folks inside of small and mid-sized organizations is this constant barrage of third-party vendor assessments. So we know that these enterprise organizations have teams of analysts who will first off define vendors that they work with who may put their organization at risk, and they use GRC risk compliance technology and tools to identify which organizations may impact them. So do they have access to their networks? Are they actually storing their sensitive data? How's that all coming together? Once they've defined that, they're sending these really deep questionnaires at these organizations, asking them what cybersecurity do you have in place? What controls are you mapped against? Any types of frameworks? Do you have certification in a specific cybersecurity like ISO and so on? And it's challenging. A lot of organizations are being caught off guard. They're getting, perhaps, we're hearing lots of stories like, hey, we just sold a really great project at this organization. We're excited about it. And next thing you know, this questionnaire came across, and we don't know how to answer these questions. And it's mainly because there's not an IT security professional, in the organization helping them there. The CMMC compliance side, from what we're seeing, is challenging for smaller organizations as well. And I know it's still evolving and there's still things being put in place. And I think that it's all heading in the right direction. And I do believe that the reason why it's there is for good reason. But we are hearing smaller manufacturers asking for grant monies and funds in order to help them improve their cybersecurity, because it seems like to get the controls in place to meet the maturity level that's being asked for at CMMC, perhaps level 3, is going to be challenging for them and their businesses. And we've even heard some small manufacturers say that they may stop doing business with the DoD because of that. And I think that's a problem. We want to have small and mid-sized organizations continue to do business with the government providing those services. But it's really interesting when the third-party cybersecurity assessment comes across. They're asking a lot of questions about how you're protecting your networks and your devices and protecting the data that they may be providing to you. They're also getting into not even technical controls. They're asking about how are you training your employees? How often is that happening? Are you doing criminal background checks? What's your physical security look like in your organization? Definitely going into technical controls and asking these questions, such as, what firewalls do you have in place? What's the endpoint protection suite? What version are you running? Again, to really a lot of detail. Now, one of the things that I think you need to think about as well is when you are filling out these assessments and you're completing them and you're sending them to another organization, remember that you're providing them a lot of sensitive information about your cybersecurity posture inside of your group. It doesn't mean that you can just ignore them and not answer the question, because you're probably going to lose the business. But you should have a conversation about how they're going to protect the information that you provide to them. Now, a step further of what we're seeing happening here is it's going further than just questionnaires. Along with the questionnaires, we're seeing legal security policy addendums and documents coming across to small and mid-sized organizations, where they're asking the organization, okay, can you fill in this questionnaire? And by the way, can you sign this legal agreement that says that you are going to have these controls in place and meet our cybersecurity requirements moving forward and for the length of our agreement together? And these are very detailed policies and legal agreements that they're asking organizations to sign. And remember, if you sign that agreement, you have to consider that you have to abide by that. If you do have a breach or an incident and you don't disclose it to them a specific period of time, perhaps that's written in the agreement, or you don't have those controls in place that you said you did, you could be setting yourself up for some legal exposure there. And I think that one of the challenges we're going to see continuing to grow is that, small and mid-sized organizations are going to have to rely on data security attorneys to help them through these. So your standard corporate attorney probably not the right choice in order to review those agreements, because they do talk a lot about cybersecurity and IT security controls. But a data security attorney is probably going to be necessary. And again, we're talking about costs and challenges on that front to get there. I don't think this is something new to everybody who's on the call, but ransomware continues to climb and it's escalating in growth year after year. We've been watching this for years. It's coming from a bunch of different ways. I think one of the most interesting things that happened in 2020 is, we saw the government basically state that, before you go and start to cooperate and pay the ransom that's being demanded, you should really be talking to the authorities about who you're providing that money to, because you may be breaching laws here in the United States. And I think it's important that everybody understand that that's the situation. We also see a lot of cyber insurance providers also assisting there. On the ransomware side, there's lots of guidance coming out from the government that you should take advantage of. There's some great publications. There's a link there down at the bottom that I highly recommend you go to and you download, but it's got some good information there on how to get your cyber hygiene and posture in place to help your organization from a ransomware situation. Now, we did a really interesting webinar, and you can go to our website and check it out, with Rob Kanacki, who is the former director of cybersecurity at the White House. And Rob shared a lot of really great information about, how our adversaries actually getting into people's networks and conducting their crimes. And he shared a lot about how that they were actually testing their malware and attacks against email filters that might be deployed, including endpoint protection systems, utilizing malicious resources to, and paying them to try and test to ensure that it works. We also had a long conversation just supporting the things that I'm sharing here, that there are attacks for sure going towards non-enterprise organizations. There is a lot of valuable data inside of a small and mid-sized organization today, and the adversaries and attackers know that, and if they can get into that, it's a great spot for them. We also know that a lot of smaller organizations today are providing technical services to larger entities and many other entities as well. And so as we've seen before, this supply chain risk of perhaps breaching one organization is allowing someone to get into the door of another organization. And so knowing that small and mid-sized organizations are often taking care of a lot of different companies, perhaps they're a technology provider and so forth, they need to make sure that they're buttoned up as well. And I think that the fact is that it's difficult to get those IT professionals on staff. We've got budget challenges there. So how can you really do that? And I think the fact is that there's really not any choice other than to look at options such as outsourcing your cybersecurity.
Are daily backups and testing the backups, like when would you test your backup to avoid ransomware instead of making the payments?
Yeah, I think the key here is getting a good backup solution in place with snapshots and all those things that you need. And remember also that your data today is not just in one spot. Your data is on your email systems, your data is on your servers. A lot of people are storing data in the cloud. When you think about SaaS applications, remember that even a small and mid-sized organization today may have 30 or 40 different SaaS applications that they're utilizing today. And you've got to consider the fact that you need backups on many of those different systems. It could even be just not even ransomware, it could be just an insider threat where somebody goes in there and deletes a bunch of information out of a software as a service application that you might use for project management, and so on. So consider, and when you're thinking about your backup strategy, consider that it's got to go deeper than just perhaps something that's sitting, on a server on-prem inside of your environment. You've got to remember that you have all these other SaaS applications that your organization might use. Now, one of the interesting things I'm seeing as well is there's a meeting that occurs once a year with worldwide CEOs and leaders, the conference board. And in 2019, the US CEOs ranked cyber threats as the #1 external concern that they had. #1. Now you can see at the bottom of the slide that Europe, Japan, China, and so on, not so high. So last year, understanding that, you've got to assume that, the CEOs are going to start saying, we need to get more cybersecurity protection in place. We need to invest more in there. Well, there's a little bit of a shift this year. So now it's moved to #6. And there's a lot of other things that have happened in 2020. People were concerned about recession. We've got issues with a talent shortage and so on that was shared. But if we've seen this drift occur where CEOs aren't willing to invest in cybersecurity because it's not their biggest concern, I think we're going to see a big change here where the IT professionals and cybersecurity professionals who are asking non-IT business leaders for funding and so on, the key things that they need, that because it's not sitting there as #1 or #2, it's going to be a challenging situation. We've got to make that change. Now these are some ideas and concepts that we constantly hear from customers that we speak to. So the first one is we know attacks and attackers and adversaries, they don't work 8 to 5 hours like the rest of us do. The fact is that attacks are going to have to happen during the day and at night. So how do you protect yourself against that? The second thing is a huge risk is the internal users. They're using the systems, they're logging into all these different SaaS applications. They're the ones who are getting the phishing emails landing in their inbox. How can we help improve cybersecurity with our internal users? The other thing that constantly comes up is the remediation question. I think that most organizations are very concerned that if something happens, who's going to help us? And I don't think it's a good situation from an incident response perspective to sit there and just wonder about that. I think you need to get your things in place and ensure that you have things in check. The other thing that people are asking about, and we're seeing a huge uptick in testing and scanning, is because people are starting to realize that there may be holes and weaknesses in the software applications they're using, perhaps in their networks, perhaps there's a configuration issue. But the question comes down to, could an attacker breach, through someone on those vulnerabilities or weaknesses? The next thing is, if you do go out and start to build a stack of different technologies and you're a small team, how are you going to manage all of those different tools? So let's say you do set up 14 or 13 different tools inside your group, and you have to manage that along with all the other tools and systems that you have. How can you do that? And how do you train a new person who comes on board on how to manage those tools as well? That can be really challenging. And finally, the question comes around, if something did happen in that organization, I think it's important for everybody to ask themselves this question, is are we confident that we could really contain an attack if it started to happen with the team that we have and the tools that we have? And, with the shortage and maybe the skill sets, and, I think we're seeing great things where, traditional IT professionals who don't have security experience are starting to train themselves and get up to speed. I think that's really great, but these are the questions that we're seeing. So from our perspective, we really feel that you've got to get these key layers of cybersecurity in place. You got to get technology in place for sure, but you also have to build a culture of cyber defenders inside of your organization where, you can try to get everybody sort of engaged so that they can start to work with you. And then, maybe not the most fun part of cybersecurity, but policies and plans and rules, those are all important things that need to be in place too. And so we really feel that if an organization can get comprehensive cybersecurity in place, beyond just technology sitting on a computer or a firewall, and start getting assessments, testing, preparedness documents, and so on, get education inside of the organization, and also have protection layers in place, that they're starting to get themselves more towards comprehensive cybersecurity and in a better spot than where they need to be. I want to dive in a little bit and just talk about assessing and testing, because an assessment, in my opinion, is a great place for an organization to start. So if someone's sitting there, even if they're the business owner of the company, and they're saying, I don't know where I stand, I'm concerned about cybersecurity, do we have holes here, could someone get in? Performing an assessment is a great place to begin. So what can an assessment involve? A lot of assessments are technical in nature. Many of them are questionnaire based, but if you can actually do an assessment against one of the cybersecurity frameworks like NIST CSF or 800-171 and so on, you'll be mapping yourself against controls that are specific in the cybersecurity industry. Now here at Defendify, we have these assessment tools built in our platform, and interestingly enough, thousands and thousands of organizations have used it. Our analytics in our last look have shown that nearly 70% of people who did our cybersecurity health checkup tool, had a failing grade, which shows us that organizations do need to start making some improvements and getting things in check. So a good assessment, and there's lots of ways you can do this. You can use technology and questionnaires and so on. You could hire a consultant to come in and perform that, on spreadsheets or however else they might do it. But no matter what, this is a great place to begin. Get your assessment done, and it should be done regularly. I don't think you should do an assessment once and say that you're there, especially even if you look at certifications like SOC 2 and so on, it needs to be happening on a regular basis. That's really important. The second place is getting vulnerability management in place. And that can be done in a number of different ways, but traditionally, in a simplified manner, external scanning of the network, internal scanning of IT, IoT, perhaps even OT devices inside of the network, and understanding, if there are vulnerabilities there and weaknesses. If you're a software development firm, you should be performing vulnerability scanning against your web applications as well, see if there's weaknesses that are discovered there too. Something that a lot of people just don't even think about is their marketing sites. So you'll read lots of articles, and you should do a little bit of research, for instance, where there's weaknesses on people's websites, where they've been compromised by attackers, and next thing you know, their web page changes. We were working with a law firm where someone had managed to hack into their marketing website, and when you clicked on one of the attorneys' names, it would take you to a casino gambling site. Not a good situation from a reputation perspective for that attorney, but it's a thing that people don't think about. If your website has been breached and there's redirects or malware injected in there, you're really not doing a great job for your own company, but you're also putting others at risk when they come to your website and start to interact with that. Do some checks on your websites, even your marketing sites, even though we know that most of the time they're managed and run by a separate webmaster who's built all that stuff up. It is important to check that out. Now, you can get the vulnerability scanning in place and identify those vulnerabilities and so on, but you can take it a step further by hiring penetration testers to perform their tests. So they can actually do that in a number of different ways, but even for small and mid-sized businesses, we see most of them have not even performed an external pen test. And that's where an engineer will be running tools, technologies, and techniques to try to break into the network, provide back a full report of their findings. What did they accomplish? What did they discover? We've seen all types of different things. As an example, discovering that they can actually get into a video surveillance system that might be, that's inside of an organization, be able to see the cameras inside of there. That's a huge risk to an organization as well. But, understanding what can be done by the bad people with people who are good people who have the similar skill sets is a great way to get started. So, as I discussed, there's assessment tools there that, are not technical in nature, and then you have your assessment tools that are more technical in nature. Now, I'm going to touch on this, and I don't want to get too deep about it because I know it's always a great conversation amongst folks, but I think we do have to continue to talk about passwords. This is the most common passwords of 2020, and it's released by a lot of the password manager companies who have the tools and so on. And I know that all of us on this webinar would never use these passwords. We're a lot smarter than that. But it is true that it's not just you, it's everybody who works at the organization who's enabling their passwords. And remember, it goes further than just the ones perhaps that you have control on. I shared earlier that a lot of organizations are using 30, 40 SaaS applications. QuickBooks as an example, a very popular tool used by smaller organizations, perhaps the CRM system. Do you have controls in place that are managing passwords amongst all of those different SaaS applications? I hear from a lot of people who say, I've got it controlled right there at Active Directory, but does it extend through there? Hey, Gary.
Do you trust tools like Dashlane or LastPass or 1Password? Because aren't they a target to be breached by hackers if you've moved all your passwords into a SaaS app that may or may not be as secure as you're saying?
I think it's a great point. I think today, as we get further and start talking about these key things, I don't think you have much of a choice. I think you have to use a password manager today, and you have to select accordingly. Not to sit here and name any brands or anything like that, but you have no choice. I think that the key is you need long passwords, unique passwords for every single site, and how do you manage that? Anyone who uses a password manager today will tell you that they probably have 60 to 100 different passwords in there. There's no way you're going to store that in your head. There's no way you're going to keep passphrases, rolling around. I don't think you have any choice. I think what you'll see in the next slide is that it's really important that you have a very strong password on that password manager, and then you have multi-factor authentication enabled as well. What would you do if you discovered that there was a breach on one of those password managers? It's not a good situation. You'd have to respond just like anything and move towards resetting passwords on all your systems. There's just going to be a lot of them.
What are the privacy implications to be kept in mind when restoring data from backups because of a ransomware attack?
In regards to restoring it?
Yeah, it's a tough question. Privacy implications to be kept in mind when restoring data from backups.
I don't necessarily understand the question, but I think that one of the key things in a ransomware attack from a privacy perspective that we've seen is, I think that it's important to understand when the forensic investigation is occurring, the question is often posed of, did the attacker take the data or not? If a ransomware attacked and the data was encrypted, did they steal data ahead of time? And we're seeing incidents now where the attackers are starting to dangle the data out and saying, hey, pay us X amount of money through that ransomware attack. If you don't, though, we have the data and we're going to start to put it, in a public facing manner. And we've seen lots of incidents that have been public news about, even recently, about these types of attacks. So I think from a privacy perspective, you have to pose the question of, has that data been breached?
Great answer. Next quick question. I hate to ask you to bounce around on slides, but Brian said, Can you share the reference URL or PDF of the slide containing the list of CEO concerns? That was an interesting data point, and I would like to explore that further. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to release a recording of this, and you'll get the URL at the bottom of it. But it's the conference board. The conference board has that meeting every year, and once you get that recording, you'll get that URL back. The last thing I want to do is spin all the way back, and I'll get lost through the whole mix. But check out the conference board. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much. I might pop my head back up soon.
I think it's also an interesting situation that, you know, again, you have to get your employees' credentials into a good spot here. You know, 73% of the population are using the same password on all of our systems. So we end up with this domino effect, right? One site gets breached. If they were able to obtain clear text passwords, then they can use it to cause their crimes on all their systems that people might be using. And we know all the different techniques that they're rolling around with. But, you know, some information here in regards to, you know, the largest breaches that have occurred, and you know, emails and passwords are the target. Now, I mentioned multi-factor authentication. You know, and there's lots of things you can read that say it's not perfect, but it is a next step that should be put in place. You know, you should be enabling this, not even just, you know, on your key systems, but on all systems, including all those software as a service solutions that, you know, your team may be using. A lot of organizations now are starting to deploy dark web scanning tools. These are tools where, you know, you can enable it and will search data dump repositories and other data sources for data that might be compromised in the dark web. These quite often are passwords, but there's other systems out there that will look for other types of data as well and bring them back to you. And they'll bring back data that perhaps the password in clear text, it could be hashed and so on, and where that breach might have occurred. But the Verizon report that came out most recently was saying that, you know, over 80% of hacking breaches involve the use of stolen credentials, which I think is really interesting. Now, I want to share some case studies that we've seen of organizations and companies we've looked at. So we'll start with this first one. So, you know, smaller business, 170 employees, so on that lower end of the 500 range, but a technology integrator, which I think is interesting. So these are the folks who go in and install building technology inside of a business, quite often enterprise organizations. And you know, the reason why they started talking about we need to get cybersecurity improvements in place is they actually did have a business email compromise incident at their organization. They're concerned about customer sensitive data. They're obviously realizing that, and they are deploying IoT devices into the customers' networks. So where do they start? They started by performing an assessment, and they started realizing that they had surely some weaknesses there, such as, you know, some examples here. You know, employees can just install any type of software that they want, you know, running the risk of, you know, rogue software running on these devices. You know, multi-factor authentication, again, you know, not having that enabled on any cloud apps, and was part of this business email compromise and how an attacker was able to get into their email systems. This is a continual thing that we see, which is that small to mid-sized organizations quite often don't want to spend money providing computers and mobile phones to employees. So they say, yeah, you can use your own personal devices, no problem. Remember, if you do that and you don't put any bring your own device controls on those systems, you know, you're at the mercy of whatever they do with their system. And I can tell you that, you know, having talked to a lot of people who aren't really IT security conscious, that, you know, the way people use their machines today is pretty scary. And if you're not going to put those controls in place or provide them the devices and say you're only going to use a company-owned device, you know, it's definitely at risk. And then, you know, full administration control on those systems. They ran a dark web scan to see what did their email compromise situation look like. Did they have compromised passwords in the dark web? And they were pretty shocked that, you know, they bubbled up 75 clear text passwords, many of which were still being used at the organization. And from a vulnerability scan perspective, you know, running a vulnerability scan and realizing that they have 45 critical vulnerabilities discovered. And critical vulnerabilities are, you know, the ones that, as you see right here on the screen, most likely to be exploited. You've got to get these things buttoned up right away. But kudos to them. They got started, you know, and that's really what it's all about, is really beginning the journey of getting cybersecurity in place, no matter where you are. If you feel like you're middle of the road from a maturity level, that's great. You got started and you've got to continue that journey. We can't expect that everyone's going to go from 0 to 100 instantly. It's really just about getting going. Now, the reason I wanted to share this case study is because it's a medical practice. We know about HIPAA regulations and how important that is. You know, it's a small medical practice. You know, 40 employees there. You know, their customers are obviously medical patients. You know, why did leadership say we've got to get things in check? Well, they're concerned about a breach of personal health information, ransomware, a lack of meeting compliance and having those things in place. So where do they begin? They begin with their assessment. As I've been sharing, I think that's a really key place to begin. You know, there was lots of stuff discovered. You know, that there was PHI being mailed, like in the post. You know, being mailed out with, you know, unencrypted USB keys with that data on there, and that, you know, the employees and the doctors were using their personal phones with no bring your own device controls and having access to all kinds of records, and that, you know, employees are sharing same passwords for all machines, no technology and data use policies in place. So again, this was a couple of years ago, but the fact is that they took the steps to get their things in check. I think that it's really, really important that organizations begin to do that. What happened on the scan? Smaller organization, but 2 clear text passwords discovered. And on the vulnerability side, you know, discovering some medium vulnerabilities, just even from the outside of the network. So from anywhere that an attacker could be running that from. So we spent some time talking about, you know, assessing, testing, you know, and now we're going to move a little bit more into the next 2 phases of these gears that should be turning, which is being prepared and also educating at the same time. You know, the first thing is, again, not the most sexy thing, most exciting thing from a cybersecurity perspective, but policies and plans are important, and they are part of meeting compliance in a lot of different areas. The one really simple one that I think people just don't do, and that I think really should get in check is a simple technology and data use policy, also called an acceptable use policy. This sets the guidelines to all of the employees on how they're expected to use computers, mobile phones, applications, and so on. You've got to set the tone for everybody who's inside your organization as to what you expect. Now, from an IT perspective, a lot of times we hear, hey, HR takes care of that, they're fine. But I don't think that HR has the skill sets to talk about the technical things that need to be understood inside of this. This needs to be the IT leaders and also the HR leaders and the business leader working together to build this policy that's in there. I can share, you know, having known I have teenagers in my house, and we talk about cybersecurity a lot, is that the posture of even the younger generations coming into the workforce today is pretty scary. You know, they look at technology from a privacy perspective that really they should be able to do anything they want. And this is a great tool to train against. It's a great way to, when you onboard a new employee inside your organization, you should spend some time and review this document with them so they understand. You should review it as an organization, and even the non-IT business leaders should be signing that as well too. And the next thing is an incident response plan. You know, this is checking the box from a compliance and those third-party cybersecurity vendor assessment side of things as well. But it is important that you do have some type of plan in place that explains, you know, who are the key people who are going to be contacted if there's an incident. And you'll see perhaps your data security attorney on there. You're going to maybe even have some HR contacts on there, perhaps even PR if you're a bigger organization, if you have to talk publicly about a breach. But really, what are you going to do if you get hit with ransomware? What's the first step you're going to take? If you have malware, if you have a breach of sensitive data, what are those steps? And depending on, you know, what your organization looks like and all the different compliances and frameworks, it could be a very simple document or it could be very detailed. But no matter what, you need to get started there. Now, you know, we know that phishing simulation or phishing attacks are on the rise, and, you know, we see it constantly, and they're getting smarter, and they are bypassing email filter systems and landing into people's inboxes. I think it's a constant battle between the adversaries and everybody else and putting that technology in place. You've got to train your team with, you know, phishing simulations, in my opinion. And, you know, these are where you're launching what look like realistic type attacks at them. And if they click on links or open files, it's going to spot train them. You know, there's a lot of talk about, you know, the people setting up phishing simulations that have bonuses and things attached to it. Yeah, from a cultural perspective, you need to decide if you want to send those types of attacks or phishing simulations at your employees. And the question is, you know, are the cyber criminals nice about the attacks that they send? I think the ones that we see the most at this moment are the impersonation ones, where they're acting like the CEO of the company and emailing maybe a new employee who's just signed up on LinkedIn saying, hey, I need your phone number, can you send that over to me? And then starting the communication outside of the email channel. It seems, that is pretty simple and basic, but as a new employees come into the organization, maybe they haven't been trained yet, maybe they don't even have, they don't understand what's happening in the cybersecurity landscape, and they could start communicating there. And you could put your organization at risk. I do also try to share that, as I mentioned, that in times of need, phishing attacks are going to be customized for each of those individuals. The other thing is the phone. I think we forget a lot about the concept of a phishing attack, where someone could be picking up the phone and calling someone inside of the organization. I think that this now needs to be a key part of your cybersecurity training. Because cyber criminals are smart, they're criminals. And if someone called into your company and started acting like they were an employee, do you have the right procedures and plans and things inside of your business where, whoever answers that phone knows not to provide confidential information to the person on the other line without verifying who they are. And that could be pretty simple. From a security perspective, it could be, our philosophy and our concept is we don't provide any information unless we're making the outbound call. So maybe you ask your employee, hang up the phone, call them directly out of our CRM system or something like that. But it is a way to extract information and get the things that they might want to do. I thought that this was interesting. It's an article I read, and you can read the link there and do some more. But that cybersecurity researchers are discovering that social media is a way to send malware, and it's true. LinkedIn is pretty wild. You're getting a lot of requests followed by this, hey, want to do business with me and my company, and here's a link to learn more about it. You've got to be really careful with these things that are coming across. I'll also share with you that you've also got to be really careful about your sales reps using chat. The chat that you have built in your sales and marketing engines that your sales team is using to communicate with people. We've actually seen incidents of attackers try to use that to extract information too, and ask questions about individuals and leaders inside of an organization acting like they know them. Remember, you don't know who's on the other end there. Hey, Gary.
Hey, Rob. So a couple quick questions. You've got phishing and vishing and drive-by malware links. Do you recommend specific tools or techniques to resolve that? Is it just training? Is it a mix of training and some special software? Is there software that's better than AV? What do you, for those three things, what do you recommend most?
I think it comes back to layers again. I think that you definitely need to be putting those email filtering systems in place, and there's all types of different products in the market. You need to get your endpoint protection beyond just signature-based antivirus. I think that people have moved beyond all those types of different things. But I think that training is a huge part of this as well. Sometimes these attacks, like I mentioned, the impersonation attack, they're not dropping any links, and they're not actually delivering any, PDF that's being used to cause their crimes. They're basically just writing messages that say something along the lines of, hey, it's Rob, and can you send me your phone number? And it's pretty simple. So I think the training side of things today is a key part of having proper protection. This comes down again to, yes, you can send phishing simulations, but I think that you've got to take the training further. We hear from a lot of groups that they do I do an annual training, so every year I'll present to everybody. I don't think it's enough. I really do believe that you need to get your training beyond once a year. These attacks are changing so quickly, and there's all types of different things occurring. You really need to be sending people something once a month and educating them, whether that's even just using perhaps even just using the Slack or whatever your communication tool is that you have, and sharing some specific examples. That's even a step further, and keeping people aware. But there are tools that you can use to send short little videos to people and educate them on cybersecurity on a basic order. I also recommend that you figure out a way inside your organization to drive threat alerts into your business, whether that's just to the IT team, but some people are expanding it beyond that to all of the individuals in their company. But threat alerts could be from different sources that educate people on recent types of phishing attacks. It could be maybe there's a vulnerability in a specific software. Maybe there's a breach that occurred on a specific website that's very popular, or in a software application. Getting these stuff coming in towards you so you can assess it and read through it and be able to pivot if something happens is important. With all these different systems that are out there and the types of attacks, knowledge is power, and having that rolling into you, I think, is super valuable. So we've talked about assessing, testing, getting prepared with the policies and plans, educating your team. The final side is protect. So you've got to get protection in place. I think one of the biggest challenges is, if you go back and listen to the webinar that I shared earlier about with Rob Kanaki, is that we see breaches happening constantly. The ransomware is even getting into larger enterprise organizations, and they're going to get into small and mid-size as well. The question is, do the IT professionals have the things in place that are going to allow them to, detect? And then when they do detect, do they have the skill sets and the tools to really investigate? So if they have a false positive, or they have this alert come in, and perhaps they have the technology in place, do they have the skill sets to really investigate and notify? And is that happening at all times? And the question is, now they've discovered it, maybe there is something that's malicious inside of the network, maybe an adversary is in there on an endpoint. Do they have the ability to contain? Do they have the skill sets and the tools to make that happen? And then, once everything's all done, you've got to get into that post-incident analysis and understand, how did this occur and what could be done to avoid this from happening again? And, there's a lot of options. So if we look at all these different things that I shared with you today, from the assessments and the testing and the training, and if you wanted to build your own security operations center and get that going, it's gonna be a very, very significant amount of money to make that happen. So you can put all the tools, maybe get some consulting, go through the whole thing, build a whole team of cybersecurity professionals, and I think we've been pretty generous and very conservative on the salaries we're paying individuals here. Put the SIM in place and get your EDR on all your endpoints, and bring in some threat intelligence, and put all those tools in there and build it all out. But you're gonna spend a lot of money, and that's just an estimate to sort of give you an idea of what it may look like and feel like. And for a small to mid-sized organization, this is just not going to happen. You just can't afford to do it. And so you've got to find ways to sort of consolidate and bring as many things as you can into one place. Do it at a fraction of a cost so that it can be affordable for your organization. Not everybody can build these solutions at their organization themselves. They're going to have to outsource. Now, there is also, doesn't mean just giving the keys away and having everybody, having another entity do everything. There's solutions out there that are going to consolidate and bring all these things into one place, that are going to provide you reports and guidance and have professionals with you. And I'm sharing that because Defendify, that's what we do here, but there are lots of other providers too that can do that for you as well. Let's talk about Defendify. I think it's important for me to share a little bit about what we do. So we know that small and mid-sized organizations have antivirus and they have firewalls. And so you've got to get further than that. We've already sort of talked about that today. So the concept behind Defendify is that, let's build a whole bunch of different layers of comprehensive cybersecurity that go beyond that. It's not everything that you need, but it's a great amount of things consolidated into one place. And so right now, Defendify has 13 different modules within it that allow an organization to begin getting those assessments, testing, training, policies, plans, detection, all those different things in place to help protect them. And it's all automated. So we make it simple on smaller teams that don't have security teams in place, so that they can manage it and they can control it, and they can have access to cybersecurity professionals who can help guide them through the usage of the tools. But really taking it to multiple layers, and really layers that we consider foundation, culture, and technology. So each of these different tools and modules inside of the platform are easy to turn on, easy to activate. There's not a lot of setup and deployment. We've really simplified that process on purpose to really make it easy on a group. But it's got the foundational key aspects here in place to help an organization. Now here at Defendify, we're pretty proud that we've been winning a whole bunch of awards and winning all types of things like that. And really the key here is it's an all-in-one cybersecurity platform. Now, what Gary shared previously is that we want to offer to you, and We've done this for a lot of organizations, which is a free package of Defendify. And so I'm going to take a step back and just tell you the story of where the Essentials package came from. When COVID came around and our organization got together, we started saying, hey, we're seeing organizations moving to work from home. We're seeing organizations put budgets on hold. The IT professionals that we were talking to are saying, hey, the CFO won't give me any money. I do want to get this deployed. I want to get it going, but we're on hold. We got to get to work from home. And we said, well, what can we do? So we decided that we would release 3 free tools in Defendify to let an organization start to get some things in check. So the first thing is the Cybersecurity Health Checkup tool. That's included, no charge. That allows an organization to go and perform an assessment on themselves. They can do what we call our quick checkup, or they can do our full checkup. If they do a full checkup, they'll actually go through, I think it's 120 some odd controls, and then they'll be scored and graded at the end of it. So they'll get a full report that will showcase to them what their grade is, show them areas where they need to make improvements. And there'll be recommendations in there as well. It's mapped to a number of different compliance frameworks. So you'll see as you get your report how each of those controls, let's say you failed in one of the controls, you'll actually see it mapped against CSF and some other frameworks there as well. The next thing is you can get started with a vulnerability scanner. We've seen most organizations don't even have external vulnerability scanning running, so that's available to just get deployed and run. And we see lots of organizations just do a single IP address external network scan and bring back lots of vulnerabilities that they can start to realize and start to fix up inside of their organization. And I also shared that really feel that having these incoming threat alerts from a knowledge-based perspective is very important in an organization. So we give that at no charge as well. So what you'll get is, multiple times a week, almost every single day, you'll be receiving alerts showcasing phishing types of attacks that are occurring, maybe vulnerabilities of specific software or hardware, maybe some tips and tricks that can help improve your cybersecurity inside of your organization. That's all free to you. So you can go to defendify.io and /essentials, and you can sign up right there and get access instantly to the 3 free tools and start to really assess as to where you stand and see where things are going. So just to summarize again, I think the key part here that we want to talk about is that, get started. If your organization, whether it's at the beginning stage, you're in the middle stage of maturity, or all the way through, is you've got to constantly improve. I don't think cybersecurity is a project you do once. I think it's something that should be ongoing and be a program of improvement. Hey, Gary.
Yeah, a couple quick questions before you jump into the quick start guide. Rob, do you guys offer anti-phishing training or tools?
Yeah, Defendify today inside of its platform has a phishing simulator. It has awareness training tools. There's a poster library that you can download and you can send to employees, in one of those like Slack or however you're communicating. There's a classroom training that's built inside of there so that you can actually go out and train those first-time employees and give them a baseline of cybersecurity. You can also build a technology and data use policy in there. So if you want to build that, you can utilize the Defendify tool to do that too.
So no clicking on attachments that say you won the lottery. It'll be one of my acceptable use policies. And then we'll send out a phishing attack with a fake you won the lottery. And then we'll see the results of how many employees clicked it.
Yeah, and it's got to be ongoing. I see a lot of times with a lot of people who purchase phishing simulators is they'll do it once or twice and then it sort of falls off, because a lot of times they're gonna have to build the template and manage the tool and all that. We've got this down to a really automated, simplified process where you can focus on your daily job and let the phishing simulator launch out once a month and make your life easy. But it's a training tool. And Gary, I think the other thing to talk about is building the culture inside of the organization. There's a lot of fun that you can have with it too. And I think as the IT team inside of an organization, you should do that. You should give out prizes. You should name the top cyber defender inside of your organization. I see all kinds of creative things. I've seen people giving ice cream socials, cards being given away, bonuses for people who actually complete their awareness training and do that every single month. So there's lots of ways that you can do it that makes it fun for everybody in the organization.
And can it still be done? Since COVID, we were at 3% working from home, and now we've gone into this digital transformation where 47% of Americans and people globally, the numbers keep going up, are all working from home remotely. Can Defendify help stretch the defense out into the home?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and first off, I don't think that's going to change too much. I think that today you're going to see many people in the workforce today say, I actually like working from home and it allows me to have flexibility. So I think as if you're involved in being, providing cybersecurity at your organization, consider that this is probably a thing that's going to stay. And I think that if you don't do that as a CEO and allow your employees to do that, they're probably going to go elsewhere and work at a place that's going to allow them to do that. Our breach detection and response extends to the endpoint. It doesn't matter whether it's sitting inside of someone's home or a VPN back to the office. We are going to provide protection there. Our cultural and training tools are absolutely valuable. Phishing attacks can happen whether you're sitting at home and it's probably even more important now than ever because, there's a lot of distractions in the home environment. You've got perhaps the children running around, maybe a spouse is doing something beside you and you get emails rolling in. We know how quickly they're coming in. People are prone to make mistakes when they're distracted. And I think that having phishing training and cybersecurity awareness training is essential right now.
I just got a really good phishing attack, by the way, where they made it look like it was from Amazon, saying I just spent $3,000 on a camera shipped to someone else, and they had an 800 number that the bad guys were using to trick me, to make me think I'm giving Amazon, my credit card. Of course, I didn't call the number, but it was so good looking, that if you weren't looking for the header or the source, and in your training, I'm sure you teach people. It's easy to find out where that email came from.
Right, it's definitely part of the training. One of the philosophies we continue to talk to people about is like, if you were not expecting it, you're going to need to verify. If you got an email from a customer, remember, your customer could be breached, and then there's business email compromise happening on their side. That email system that's being used is the same email system you're communicating from all the time. So when you get that email that says, for instance, I haven't got an invoice or I need to change a payment information or whatever the case may be, that may be coming from a legitimate email situation, from a legitimate email source. And verifying before you send sensitive information, change banking information, that is really the place to be sitting at. And so I think that's where the training needs to be at.
Rob, we have a few questions, and I know before I ask them, can you tell us about the Quick Start?
Yeah, the Defendify Quick Start Guide it's a fun piece to read. We try to have some fun as we developed it, but it gives an organization the basic fundamentals of how to get started with cybersecurity. So it's going to go through some ways to build some cultural things inside the business and deploy the technologies and so on. You can go and download that at defendify.io/quickstart. So again, maybe two things to do coming out of this webinar is go get the essentials package and get started. And the other thing is download the Quick Start Guide and get some tips from the Defendify team.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think we have time for one last question. Does the Defendify tool suite work on mobile devices also where BYOD is in place? Do the tools also work on non-Windows platforms, i.e. are you technology agnostic?
So we're not a bring your own device technology solution, but that being said, we have a lot of things that are going to guide you in regards to mobile device management and control. So from a risk assessment perspective, so we'll definitely help you there. And then yes, like for instance, vulnerability scanning and so on is going to be, hardware and software agnostic. It's going to scan all the different types of software and so on. So yeah, I think that the question can go in multiple different ways, but I'd recommend, reach out to us at Defendify and we'd be happy to have a chat. We can give you a demo of the Defendify platform and you can talk to our team about how we might be able to help your organization out.
Sounds great. Any other questions? All questions are good questions. We've got about 60 seconds and then we will wrap it up. So let's see if we can pull in any more questions from any attendees. If not, I think this has been a great session. Someone asked about the gears, that you should have a response stage, but I think in your 5th gear, you had breach detection and response.
That's correct. Yeah, the last one is breach detection and response, which is under that final gear. But I think that's a great tip from a marketing perspective that maybe we should consider that too. So thank you to whoever brought that up.
Yeah, and I was paying attention, Rob. So thank you so much for teaching us the smart approach to building comprehensive cybersecurity without security staff. And,
Thanks for having me, Gary. Appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. And I love the 5 gears actually you shared with us: assess, test, prepare, educate, and ultimately protect. You gave great tips and ideas on building a cyber solid foundation of plans, policies, and procedures. I think it's important, as you said, to build the right culture, and the culture in a positive way, with positive training and gifts and bonuses and awards and kudos to employees who help improve the security posture. So great stuff, actionable strategies. The couple of URLs you shared are so important. Free tools and a free quick start guide. So Rob, thank you so much, and to our attendees for making it through the whole session. And then, I'd say, hey folks, come back. Another exciting episode of Cyber Defense Webinars will be right around the corner. But Rob, thank you most of all for a phenomenal session. Can't wait to have you back.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it.